This is the Meetinghouse with Dwight A. Moody. News, reviews, commentary, and conversation on religion and American life. Now, here is Dr. Moody.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Meetinghouse. I am Dwight Moody, the founder and host of the Meetinghouse. We're glad that you've joined us today for our conversation on religion and American life, coming to you over radio in southeast Georgia, my home on St. Simon's Island, Brunswick, Georgia, and also through YouTube and Facebook and on the website of the Meetinghouse and of St. Stephen's Baptist Church. We're facing some changes, though, in our distribution and broadcast. We'll talk to you about that in a few minutes. We're in the series, as you know, of dealing with Christian nationalism, what I have called the most powerful and influential religious movement in America today. I've been writing on it and broadcasting on it for a number of weeks now. Some of you have been listening on a regular basis. Today, I have a guest, Dr. Brian Kaylor from Jefferson City, Missouri. He holds a master's and PhD degree in communication from the University of Missouri. He is the editor and president of Word and Way, a religious news and commentary site out there in Missouri. We're glad to have him. This is his first time in the Meetinghouse. He's written a terrific article about Russia and the fascination of Christian nationalists with Russia and the Russian model of church-state relations. We'll get to talk to him in just a minute. But first, as always, we have the news. I've got 5 news stories, as always, and we're going to begin today in Washington, D.C. The National Catholic Educational Association released preliminary figures showing a slight increase in Catholic school enrollment for the first time in 2 decades. While enrollment in secondary schools is down slightly, the Catholic enrollment of pre-kindergarten students is up by almost 6%. Overall, the enrollment is up by 62,000 students nationwide. But even that increase does not put these schools at the same level that they had in pre-pandemic levels. Right now, Catholic school enrollment is down 2.8% below what it was just 2 years ago. Out in Los Angeles, 112 million people watched the Los Angeles Rams defeat the Cincinnati Bengals, Super Bowl 56 Sunday night. I was one of them, pulling for the Bengals. But only a few, and that did not include me, heard the testimony of the game MVP, Cooper Kupp. He caught 2 touchdown passes in a record-setting performance. But he confessed after the game that 4 years ago, when the Rams lost in the Super Bowl to the New England Patriots, he had a vision. Quote, "I don't know what it was. There was just this vision of God, that God revealed to me that we were going to come back, that we were going to be a part of a Super Bowl, we were going to win it, and somehow, I was going to walk off the field as the MVP of the game," end quote. What a story. There were a lot of people who thought he shouldn't have won it, but he did. Back to Washington, D.C. Recent events related to, quote, religious freedom have spurred more attention to popular opinion about what scholars call the first freedom. Professor Ryan Burge, who has been a guest in the Meetinghouse, published an article surveying recent legal activity, including cases involving public health protocols and if and how those protocols apply to churches. He draws attention to research conducted in late 2020, a little over a year ago, by the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. He says, or writes, quote, "Broadly, a majority of Americans champion religious freedom. While nearly 40% of people of faith believe that religious freedom is protected too little in the United States, that view is only shared by 18% of people who say they are not religious. At the other end of the spectrum, 20% of Americans who say they are not religious believe that religious liberty is protected too much. Only 7% of religious people agree with that. There is clear evidence that the average American is more likely to give faith practices more latitude when they impact least, but more hesitant to protect beliefs and behaviors that disturb others in the community or the workplace. From Hendersonville and many other places throughout the United States, people of faith are praying for peace in Ukraine. The congregation of Providence Baptist Church of Hendersonville, North Carolina, of which I am the pastor, gathered around Ukrainian ministers Gennady and Mina Pogaskis of Kyiv. We offered prayer for their safety and for peace in their country. In Newark, New Jersey, Reverend Boris Godziak, Metropolitan Archbishop for the Ukrainian Catholic Church in Philadelphia, said there are daily prayers for peace being said in each of their 200 or so Ukrainian Catholic parishes in the U.S. And today at 2:00, just at the end of this broadcast, the National Baptist Convention of America is hosting a nationwide prayer meeting on Zoom with a focus on peace in Ukraine. And sadly, from Lexington and Louisville, Kentucky, big changes are in the works for the television network of St. Stephen's Baptist Church of Louisville, and that includes the Meetinghouse. Chief Engineer Alex Mattingly has resigned her position to become editor and videographer for a new daily television show at KET, Kentucky Educational Television. It will be hosted by Renee Shaw. Today is her last day as engineer for the Meetinghouse. We're uncertain of our continuing connection with St. Stephen's Church as they seek to sort out the direction they're going to go, but we will be back broadcasting in some form or fashion in Southeast Georgia and on the Facebook page and website of the Meetinghouse. Alex,
Hi,
talk to me.
Hi, Dr. Moody.
Yes, I want to thank you, Alex, for 1 year, one solid year as our engineer and my partner in the broadcast of the Meetinghouse. You've been terrific to work for, and it's been a wonderful partnership.
Well, thank you so much. I've had such a great time on this show, and you've got some really amazing viewers and listeners who have given some wonderful feedback, and it's just been an honor to be engaged in such a relevant conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, several people have mentioned to me your skill during those times when I've had technical difficulties and you've had to step in my shoes, really, and carry on the conversation and demonstrating that your ability is not just technical, but content as wise. I want to wish you the best of luck and success in this new, bigger, broader venture. And I hope we can stay connected and perhaps work together in some future endeavor.
Well, thank you again so much. And of course, you're always in the thick of the know. So it's always good to have a friend like you. And yeah, call me anytime. You've got my number.
Okay. Well, thank you. We'll be back in just a minute with my guest today, Dr. Kaylor. You are in the Meetinghouse. I'm your host, Dr. Dwight Moody, coming to you from Greenville, South Carolina, in our studio there. We've been broadcasting from North Carolina for about a year, and we started off our broadcast in South Georgia, where my home is. But we're glad to welcome Dr. Brian Kaylor to the Meeting House today. Brian, this is your first gig on the Meeting House, right?
Yes, it is. It's great to be here. Thanks.
Well, you're in Jefferson City, Missouri. I think I told you maybe a little bit about my connection to Missouri.
Yeah.
I graduated from Hazelwood High School, 1968 at the time, the largest high school in the state of Missouri. Almost 900 graduates in my graduating class.
Wow.
I've stayed in touch with many of my graduates. There were two of us preacher boys in my graduating class. Tom Billings was the other, and he has for years and years been on the senior leadership staff of the Baptist Association of Houston, Texas. And he and I have stayed in touch. Well, our subject today is this Christian nationalism. I know it's as much a concern and interest to you as it is to me. You've written an article that I have read carefully, actually 2 or 3 times, about Russia. And I'm going to read you part of it and ask you a question.
Okay.
You wrote, in 2016, Putin signed a law targeting missionary and evangelistic activities. The law criminalizes sharing one's faith outside of an official house of worship. Officials used the law in the first year to bring 193 cases against 136 individuals in 57 religious communities. Those cases resulted in 143 convictions, 140 fines, and the deportations of 5 foreigners. Those targeted that year included 63 cases against Pentecostals, 43 against Jehovah's Witnesses, and 31 against Baptists. End quote. In spite of this, as you and I know, Christian nationalists in America look to Russia as an example of how Americans, as an example for Americans for how religion and state can cooperate and support each other. And then you have this summary statement, quote, politicians like Josh Hawley, who is your senator out there in Missouri, pundits like Tucker Carlson of Fox News, and preachers like Franklin Graham feign or fake concern about religious persecution, but in bolstering Putin's regime, they fail to grasp the moral stakes of this moment, end quote. Why is it that these people are so enamored with church-state relations in Russia?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's an important question. I mean, one of the things that I have found frustrating for years now since this 2016 law came into place is how little attention and understanding there is to this in the United States. I mean, there is ongoing religious persecution, and it impacts a number of religious minorities. Jehovah's Witnesses have been particularly targeted. Muslims have been targeted, but even Christians like Baptists and Pentecostals as a minority Christian group in Russia have been targeted. And so it's frustrating that it hasn't gotten more attention. And then adding to that frustration is this love, this praise for Putin and his regime. And I'll be honest, at first I thought, I mean, the relationship was already there. So even before this particular law, Putin was already doing some persecution, though not as much. And Graham was already praising Putin, back in 2014. They put Putin on the cover of Decision magazine, the magazine of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. And Franklin Graham wrote this column praising Putin and using that to attack Barack Obama, who was president at the time. And a lot of it seemed to be this idea of, well, so here's a guy, Putin, who doesn't like Muslims and doesn't like homosexuals. And so Franklin Graham was willing to ally in that joint cause against, common enemies, if you will. But I think it actually goes deeper than that. So at first I thought it was just this common ground on some ideological issues. But then Trump came along. And I think what we have seen is that there is also this desire for an authoritarian strongman figure, and that they really do want this Putin-esque figure to come in and establish their brand of Christianity here in America. And so I think it goes beyond just the ideology to even a desire for authoritarian leadership.
I agree with you. So let's explain just a minute about what church-state relations in Russia look like. The groups that they're persecuting, of course, are minority groups, marginalized groups. They're not established state churches. All of them kind of heirs of what we call the Radical Reformation. But the Orthodox Church in Russia is the state church. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, the Russian Orthodox Church is very powerful in Russia. It is the dominant church tradition. Its leadership is closely aligned with Putin and has been really important. So as Putin makes rhetoric about being a defender of Christianity, which he calls himself, the leadership of the Russian Orthodox Church has been there to validate him and to praise his leadership, to in many ways, rhetorically Christian his leadership of Russia. And so that's a really important relationship. And so a lot of times it's a little hard to know, who's leading what here, right? Are these laws coming from a political motivation? Are they coming from the church, the Russian Orthodox Church, and a religious motivation? Either way, we have this collusion of church and state between Putin and the Russian Orthodox Church. If you think back a decade or so ago, and I've written about this before, not in the most recent piece that you just read from, there was the famous protest by the feminist punk rock group Pussy Riot.
Yes.
And it was very much targeting Putin. But the video that got them in trouble, the song that they did, was actually a prayer. It was in the form of a prayer, and it was filmed in a Russian Orthodox church, and not just any Russian Orthodox church, but one that was close to Putin. And so they, in their protest against Putin, they also recognized that this had to be a protest against the Russian Orthodox Church as well. Because one is strengthening the other and vice versa.
And to be fair, of course, the Russian Orthodox Church had suffered for a long time under communism, which repudiated religion, repudiated the church, tried to stamp it out, and put all sorts of restrictions on it. So when the Soviet Union fell and Putin came to power with this fresh affirmation of religion of the Russian Orthodox Church, for them, it may have been an answer to prayer to lift the burden of persecution off of them and to have a powerful protector and promoter. So there is that angle on it. But how does the Russian model of church-state relations so appeal to the Christian nationalists over here? We're going to come back in a minute and talk about how the whole Ukrainian thing is scrambling that up. But why is this an appeal to some American Christians?
Yeah. So, the Russian Orthodox Church, you're right. They were persecuted for 7 decades or so under communist rule. But historically, the Orthodox Church, like some other church traditions, does have a theology that I think makes it more amenable to partnering with and even aligning with state government. You made a comment about some of those that are being persecuted that are Christians are from the Radical Reformation. And I think that's an important thing because theologically, let's take Baptists, for instance. I'm a Baptist, grew up Baptist, and Baptists historically not only were about believers' baptism, like that was the key component that brings the name of Baptist, but another aspect of Baptist was this idea of church-state separation so that there would be true religious liberty for all people. And so Baptist, I think in Russia, even though they were excited to see evangelistic opportunities open up, they were excited to see the persecution of the communist period come to the end, were less susceptible because they held to that historic understanding. They were less susceptible to align themselves with the state. And so one of the things that has hurt Baptists in Russia is that they historically often refuse to register with the state government as a body. And that makes them more likely to be targeted now. This is something they haven't been doing for decades. They haven't been registering, but now they're more targeted by these newer laws because they have this, I think, healthy skepticism of getting too close to government. And so I think what we're seeing then among Christian nationalists is Christian nationalists reject that idea, that warning that we've had for 400 years from the Radical Reformation. They don't see that as a concern. And so they do like the model of the Russian Orthodox Church. They want to see that here, where there is a dominant church, where there is a close tie, a close relationship between whoever's in the White House and then their chosen religious denomination.
And I do think it's fair to say that Christian nationalists in the United States think that our government is being run by atheists and secularists and liberals and people who don't like the religious tradition. I'm remembering the quote of, I think it was the Colorado House of Representative, who said some months ago at a rally, this country is being run by ungodly people and it's time for us to take it back. And it's almost laughable in some ways, because you couldn't get elected president in the United States unless you had some connection to a Christian church. All of the Supreme Court justices have to be people of faith, or they don't get elected or appointed. But I think it is this fear, don't you think, that the Christian leaders have of secularism in the United States, marginalizing religion, and they look over there to Russia, where the state apparatus is not marginalizing religion, but at least publicly embracing it. And they say, boy, we need more of that here in the United States.
Yeah, and I think that there's an understandable viewpoint that, I mean, let's be honest. Look, our faith is very important to us. So I understand the temptation of, I believe this is the truth, and I want more people to believe it. I want to see what I think are good, healthy ideas codify. I get that temptation. The problem is that it never seems to work out well for the church. And so, I mean, we always see this alignment between church and state seems to be more about the state, more about the politics, and the church is the one that gets used. I'm sure you're familiar with the way that Tony Campolo likes to put it, but I think it is the best description of what happens here, that mixing church and state is like mixing ice cream and manure. It doesn't hurt the manure, but it sure messes up the ice cream. And that seems to happen time after time after time again in history. And I think that's the mistake Christian nationalists are thinking. They're making here is they think they can run this thing and not realize that they're the ones that are actually losing out.
Speaking of Tony Campolo's metaphor there, I am assuming for just a minute that the ice cream was the church and the manure was the state. Is that what you think?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And, to be fair, Tony's coming from like Roger Williams, right? Roger Williams talks about the hedge between the wilderness and, when he talks about so Jefferson's borrowing his wall of separation between church and state. And he's borrowing from Roger Williams, but he talks about the hedge protecting the garden of the church from the wilderness of the state. And so, yeah, there's definitely a pro-church bias, if you will, from Tony Campolo and Roger Williams. And
of course, those of us who've been in the church for a long time know that there's a lot of manure in the church. Sometimes that metaphor deserves to be flipped. And now we have, of course, Russia threatening an invasion of Ukraine. And as I read in my news segment, the little church where I preach in North Carolina, Hendersonville, North Carolina, just up the road a piece, we had as our guest two fabulously impressive people. One is a Mexican, carries a Mexican passport, working in Ukraine. The other is a Russian, carrying a Russian passport. They met at seminary in the United States and took up a call 20 years ago to go to Ukraine, Kyiv, and to work with street children. When the Soviet Union fell, there was, of course, chaos all over Ukraine, and many families collapsed, the economy collapsed, many street children. So these people went over there, started what they called the Village of Hope to take care of these people. They left on furlough late last November, but they talked to us Sunday about this. So you've got people all over America praying that Putin will not attack Ukraine. So I wonder how this scrambles this Christian nationalist equation of church plus state in Russia as a model for Americans. Here he is, an aggressive dictator, and all these Christians in America are praying that it's not going to happen. Wonder how this impacts somebody like Franklin Graham. Wonder what he's praying for right now.
I do wonder, and I mean, I'm not hopeful that